Hello and welcome to Founded, an Airwave Media podcast, where we find the stories you missed in history class, because the tea was hot before they dumped it into the harbor. I'm Tori Phantom, and joining me today is someone who probably doesn't understand how escalators work, Gwenna Lathland.
Like, I get the vague principle of the rolling stairs, but no, those motors seem frightening. And what do you mean it's just a gaping maw under there? No.
Yeah, they don't make sense to me either, so...
Moving sidewalks, though, I like them. I get really excited when I find them and I get to be on the moving sidewalks because then we go zoom.
Okay, so today's episode is not a regular episode because it hasn't been a regular week. We've had a huge problem with ice, so we couldn't record as regularly scheduled. That storm took us out and our technology. So, it's kind of a special episode this week, but before we get into it, we have merch. I feel obligated to tell you that. It's a rule I made for myself, so I have to follow that or I'll really disappoint myself. If you're watching this on video, I am wearing the shirt that's the tea was hot before it was dumped into the harbor shirt. Pretty cool. Designed it myself. Check out the merch shop, link in the description. Okay, I've now satisfied my own rule. We can move on.
Okay.
So no pop quiz today because, again, we can't do pop quizzes on episodes that are not in our regular scheduled timeline. But I thought it would be fun to explore the Declaration of Independence in honor of America's 250th birthday this year. And I specifically decided I wanted to talk about this as well because, as you know, since you're the one who even told me this thing existed, you can get your own copy of the Declaration of Independence that was printed at the Eads and Gill print shop in Boston, like on a printing press. So I got that, right? Obviously. And I got a frame for it, and my frame is 1 centimeter too short. So my document does not fit, but I really like the document. So I'm like, why don't we discuss it? You know?
Right.
And
Declaration of Independence.
And also, we do play that game, How Well Do You Know? The Bill of Rights, quite frequently. And I thought it would be fun to explore the Declaration of Independence because, as it turns out, you can see some of the influences on that Bill of Rights. Because the Declaration of Independence was a list of grievances that the colonists had with the king and parliament. And the Bill of Rights was written to limit the power of the government to like shield people from facing
having
such
grievances wherein they might need to write a Declaration of Independence.
Exactly. Interesting things, though, about the Declaration, right? Because it was signed over a year after the war had begun.
Yeah.
And the other part that a lot of people aren't aware of is that Independence Day was actually July 2nd, right? So we celebrate the 4th of July, but the motion to declare independence was passed by the Continental Congress on July 2nd, which led Abigail Adams' husband, John Adams, to write her a letter saying that the 2nd day of July, 1776, would be the most memorable day in the history of America, and saying that it ought to be celebrated by future generations. So he is like pretty confident in that being the day that would go down in history.
It was an important day. And yet our Independence Day is July 4th. How did we lose 2 days?
Well, so the motion to declare independence, that was brought to the Continental Congress by Richard Henry Lee back in June of 1776. They appointed their committee of 5, which included Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the main bits of it, right? And then Benjamin Franklin and John Adams. Those are the people we talk about here. So Thomas Jefferson had wrote the draft, and they went over this draft, and then they brought it. So the motion is passed, and it was on the 4th of July that the text was adopted. So that was when they were like, yes, this is the perfect text for our declaration. So it makes sense. It is an important date. But like John Adams, he was like July 2nd, just so we're all on the same page.
See,
there. Yeah.
What happened was John Adams got super excited about the procedural stuff because procedurally we declared independence from Great Britain on July 2nd. But functionally, we had a marker of that declaration and a solidified language to send to the King of England, France, and a couple other places. We had that official document on July 4th, and the letter was dated July 4th. So everybody else, we didn't care about the paperwork and the red tape. Just John.
Yeah, he was just excited, writing a letter to his wife that he wasn't supposed to write.
We needed the thing, John, not just the, like, we said the words and we all said yay at the same time. No, we need the thing, John. The thing is the important thing. That was a philosophical. The thing is an important thing. That was just.
Yeah, that was great language. Yeah, I really understood what you were talking about. I would be able to understand out of context as well. It's funny, though, because John Adams was writing all of these letters to his wife, Abigail. They weren't supposed to do that. There was like this veil of secrecy about everything happening in the Congress. He was just like, no, I am telling my number one confidant.
That's not. So what happened was he wasn't breaking any rules at all, because I am one half of a complete entity. I am a whole person, but I need you to know what you tell me, you being any person on the planet. I don't care. I can pinky swear the utmost of promises to keep my mouth shut, and it 100% does not apply to Jack. It will not leave the space between Jack and I, but we both know about it. Pinky swear or not. So, like, what John knew, Abigail knew, obviously.
Right. However, the difference being that the letters would sometimes get intercepted by, like, the British, which did land him in quite some drama throughout the story of the revolution. I'm very excited to tell you about those times. But I wanted to get into, when we're talking about the Declaration, I wanted to first talk about a very common myth when it comes to the Declaration, beyond the whole July 2nd, July 4th thing, right?
Is there a map on the back of the Declaration of Independence?
No, there isn't. Nicolas Cage has never actually seen a map. No one else has. There's no map.
Even if you do the lemon juice and the trick?
Yeah,
no map?
Q-tips or not, there's no map.
And for everyone else having secondhand embarrassment about how proud we are about that millennial joke, suck it.
But the myth I do want to talk about, not the map one, is John Hancock's signature. John Hancock, which is his name, has become synonymous with a signature because it is so large, clearly taking up half the document.
Wait. Here's the myth that I've heard. All right,
yes, please.
This is what I hear most commonly. John Hancock was so enraptured by the idea of independence from Britain, he took into his hand the quill, great and mightier than the sword, and he signed his name with every ounce of conviction he felt for this concept, and that's why it's bigger than most of the text on the page.
That's one myth. So let's talk about John Hancock's signature, okay? Because first off, it's not that big. Bigger than the rest? Sure.
Yes.
But in proportion to the amount of space for all the delegates to sign in, I'm more interested in why everyone else signed so small.
Correct. Like, it was a strange choice. I admit I have 100% seen the Declaration of Independence with mine own eyes. Many people have. But yes, I also walked up to that document expecting the entire lower quadrant of this thing to be John Hancock's signature. And it's not. It is slightly larger than everybody else's. What makes it most odd to me, and this might just be my pattern recognition, is it feels like he slammed that pen down in a slightly weird spot in the signing area, especially when you compare it to other documents that were mass signed at the time, where they tended to column and grid themselves pretty well. And John Hancock, for whatever reason, just sort of slammed in the middle of the space and went to sign in it. That was what struck me as oddest about the whole thing.
Yeah, so that is because he was the president of the Continental Congress. But one of the myths that many people have heard is that Hancock left such a clearly large and outstanding signature so that King G3 could read it without his spectacles, like is some sort of angsty in-your-face kind of gesture.
Yeah, it was the passion. The passion.
And that is a fun story. Yeah. It's a really fun story. And it's also inherently false because the signed version, the Matlack copy, the one that most people imagine when they think about the document, the one that Nicolas Cage stole in National Treasure way back in 2004, that wasn't sent to the king. That was for them.
Right. That was just pretties, literally just for hanging on the wall to be like, hey, do you remember that time we looked at the most powerful kingdom in the entire world and said, we don't want to be you anymore? Yeah. Good times, right?
Right. And so on that version where we see the big signature, that is because, well, number one, John Hancock took handwriting lessons. He loved writing. Like, he enjoyed his nice signature. Okay. And he was the president of the Continental Congress, so that's why his name is front and center. But it's more like someone's passing a card around for everyone to sign, and then the first person signs it, and then it just kind of it stands out, that kind of thing. But so the version that the king would have read, along with most people, before that Matlack copy was ready on August 2nd. That's when they were able to sign that. That was the Dunlap broadside, which was printed on a printing press, and it carried only 2 names, not signatures, printed names: John Hancock, president of the Continental Congress, and Charles Thompson, secretary. Now, the Matlack copy, there were several delegates there that did all sign at once, but the last signature wasn't obtained until 1777. Like, they just signed it when they could. They weren't all present. So that painting that we all think of is also a lie.
Yeah. Again, that Matlack copy, the handwritten version that we all imagine when we think of the Declaration of Independence, was literally a memento for themselves and a part of their own internal documentation because, well, everything was produced in double or triple or quadruplicate for posterity's sake. We didn't have servers to store this stuff on. They had to write their own version. But the one that went to the king, called the Dunlap broadside, that was printed and looked no different than any of the other broadsides. Very common forms of sending communications across the Atlantic Ocean to each other. It just looked like a printed book. It was big. It was about the size of like a New York Times front page. Like, if you unfold the whole thing. That's what went to the king, printed with 2 dudes' names on it. John Hancock. So he definitely saw the dude's name because he was the president.
It's actually much bigger on the broadside.
He definitely saw the dude's name, but no, the signature had nothing to do with it. And the one that we view it's on the display in the National Archive, it was just for fancies.
Also, fun fact about that painting of all of the signers of the Declaration, like lining up to sign the Declaration of Independence, that is factually inaccurate, but a great spirit behind it.
Yeah.
The person who painted that is Jonathan Trumbull, who you may have never heard of. However, if you look at the logo for this show, for Founded Podcast, you look at the logo, there are 2 men on that logo, one of whom being the father of our country, George Washington, and the other being Jonathan Trumbull, because he is known for his paintings, because he painted the scenes of the Revolution. He actually fought in the Revolutionary War, and then afterwards became this really, really great painter. And that's why we have ideas of what some of these things look like, is because he did recreate these scenes. And so
maybe
that's
not
why
completely
he's part of
authentically, but
yeah, it's pretty common with these types of paintings.
Almost all art isn't exactly authentic. It's describing a vibe more than accurately depicting a scene.
Yeah. But that's why Jonathan Trumbull is there on the Founded logo, because he is part of the reason we have an idea of what things might have looked like back then during this time period. But back to the Declaration.
Right after that big Founded lore drop there. All right.
Because basically, like, after the several drafts and revisions, Thomas Jefferson, as made famous by David Diggs, brought the final copy to John Dunlap to have it printed and distributed throughout the colonies, because the Declaration was written for more than the king, and it was written by the leaders in the colonial government that had been under crown authority, right? Now, that's an important part that gets left out. They were a part of the king's government and chose to dismantle it. So the goals that they had with this declaration was, of course, announcing the existence of a new country. But that wasn't all, or even like the main purpose, right? They also wanted to put their fight out on a world stage. Mm-hmm. They needed foreign allies. And of course, like France specifically, but no country at all was going to ally with the colonies, who might just go back to the mother country with like the biggest military in the world. Because if they did that, it would then lead to a new war against the countries that helped the rebels. So this was a way to say to the world, no, we're not going back. You don't have to worry about that.
We're torching this bridge. This is either going to work, or we will all be shot and killed as traitors to the crown. Yeah. We're putting this out there. This is going to happen, or we're going to die trying to make it happen. Because now that we wrote this little piece of document, there's evidence we can never out-argue that we straight up looked at our laws as British citizens and went, no, I disobey all of them and commit the most extreme treason. Mm-hmm. So the risk of you helping a rebel, you're not taking a stand the way you think you were taking a stand. Because if you don't help us and we fail, we die. We're not going to take your resources and just give them back to the UK.
Yeah, no, that's like part of the declaration, actually.
Yeah. We promise not to take stuff. See, this is why I should probably read these documents more than once every 7 or 8 years.
Don't worry. I'm covering that for you today, okay? But the other important reason that they created this document was to give them, the citizens, a cause to really fight for, like the citizens and the soldiers. Because up until this point, many were still hoping for reconciliation with Britain, and now they were fighting for their rights as American citizens. And really, it just like begs the question, like you said, I should read this more than once every however many years. So what does the Declaration of Independence say? Because like we all know.
I know
that's
those
the
first
Constitution.
We hold these truths to be self-evident?
Yes.
There we go.
It's we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And if you didn't know that part before Hamilton, you did at least know it after. But it's actually even more interesting when you read the whole thing, because the Declaration of Independence is a list of complaints and grievances against the government, an explanation for why they were declaring independence in the first place. And they explain that bit in the opening paragraph before the self-evident truths bit, saying, quote, "The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with one another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of natures and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation." In layman's terms, meaning when a population has to leave their government, leave the mother country, and create their own, explaining why is the right thing to do. Like that's they're saying, we are going to declare independence and we are going to explain why as well. Read more. And then, of course, we get to the bit that everyone quotes, which became the popular part to quote after the revolution, because the rest of the document wasn't really applicable anymore. But there's more to the statement than "we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." There's more to it, because in my opinion, the next part is actually more important. It says, quote, "that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter of or abolish it." and to institute new government, laying down its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And this part very much is leading on the John Locke, the Enlightenment period principles. So it originated from Locke. And I think that part is important because when we're trying to understand the founders, like it's the unalienable rights bit. Yeah, that's like a fun thing to say. That feels powerful. But I think when we're trying to understand the founders and their principles and where they came from, when we look at that bit there, they are saying for the citizens to secure their rights, they have to consent to the government that has the authority. And then it leans into that next bit where they're saying, like, this is in their belief system, that if the government isn't working, they don't just have a right, they have like an obligation to do something about it. And that is the principles of the founding fathers, is what they're saying here, that they felt like an obligation to preserve their rights, to fight for that.
So basically, in much shorter terms, the point of the government is to protect our inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what the government exists for. But the moment the government stops protecting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is not only the expectation, but it is the requirement. It is the part of being a citizen of the country to rise up and say, hey, you're not doing you're not protecting that thing you just did. Stop that. It's my obligation to stand up and go, no, not like that. I did not consent to you governing this way. Yes.
That's part of the whole First Amendment, right? That's why we have the right to petition and to protest. Like that First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, that freedom to petition, that was actually the intention there, was that the people in power would never stop. Like it was supposed to be an inconvenience for the elected officials to never stop getting the opinions of their constituents.
Right. And the later rules and rulings actually outlined how we can rise up and use our voices against a tyrannical government. There are rules as to how we can do that.
Right. So after they go on about how it is a citizen's duty to be a part of this, they get more specific into the things they're upset about, right? And they're saying that there's been like this long train of abuses. There has been a long train of grievances that have gone unheard. And they say, such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. So right there, they're saying, like, we have tried, we've been patient, we've reached out, and after all of this, we have to, like, it is the necessity. And it goes on to say, quote, the history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So that's the point. They're saying, listen, we're going to prove we're showing our work. That's what the Declaration of Independence is.
I do need you to know the risk that these men, they knew that guillotine was calling them for those words, because they looked at the most powerful man on the planet. Generally speaking, it is safe to say that the King of England, the Parliament, and the government of England were some of the most powerful people on the planet. So these little upstarts in North America, not just saying, hey, we don't want to be British anymore, but the King of England is guilty of tyrannical crimes, usurpations of power, and bad stuff. It was so inflammatory. And they did not have the freedoms to say that.
Yeah. The sedition, there were laws against sedition. You would go to jail. And
so again, when they were telling the world, and they even said that in there, we're telling the whole world this. We know we're going to die if this doesn't work. That's how strongly we believe it needs to work.
And that's one of the reasons that they listed out all these grievances as well, was to prove that they were not just rebels. Like, they were not randomly trying to overthrow their government. They felt like it was their only option after trying for many, many years. I mean, this dates back to the Stamp Act, right? Like the Declaration of Independence, that is 1776. The Stamp Act is 1765. Right. And there was problems before that. So they're saying we have tried every legal form of redress. Like our hand has been forced here. And we hear that in our other episodes where they're saying like, this is a huge problem. This could lead to a war.
For 10 years, more than that, for more than 10 years, we're talking about from the point it really became a problem and they really, really started. They didn't like any of the other acts. That's why they were working around them. And so it became this constant cycle of one-upping and a little more control and a little less freedom and a little more control and a little less freedom. So in the Declaration of Independence, they're basically saying, for the past decade, we've been doing everything by the book and you keep creating new books to throw at us.
Yeah. And so when we talk about these grievances, like I am going to give you these grievances. I'm going to explain them because a lot of it is Old English, right? And I did get banned on a TikTok live once for reading the Declaration of Independence, but I'm going to do it again. I feel better about it this time. We'll see if I get banned. This list of grievances, the reasons for independence, are specifically in regards to King G3, King George III in Parliament, and it goes as follows. He has refused to assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good, meaning he's prioritizing his self-interest over the public interest and has refused to allow legislatures to pass their laws. He is literally like holding out on his approval for things that they need. Moving on. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he is utterly neglected to attend to them. Meaning, he would not allow laws to be passed that are important to the people. So again, kind of expanding upon the last point, he would not allow laws to be passed that are important to the people unless he agreed to them, but then he would neglect to consider them despite the laws literally by law requiring his approval. So it would kind of turn into this legislative limbo and a way to ignore proposed laws until the colonists would just give up.
Okay. Not just not listening to the people, but actively blocking things that they tried to put forward that would alleviate some of the problems. Okay, go ahead.
He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. And that one is meaning that he wouldn't allow people the right to laws that benefit them unless they relinquish other rights and their representation in government. This one's really commentary on that idea of virtual representation and no taxation without representation. The colonies believed that their colonial legislatures should be able to make their own laws as they long had, just subject to the king's approval. That's how it had always worked. They would write the laws, they would get the approval. And they saw Parliament's continuous power grabs and attempts at raising money from the colonies directly as an attempt to take their power completely. Yes, the Stamp Act would be a part of that.
Yeah.
He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. So this is by the time that the Declaration was signed, the king had taken away a lot of the elected positions in authority to those who were elected in many colonies. And if those colonies didn't do as the king wanted, they would be punished. So you could kind of see that in the fallout from the Boston Tea Party. General Thomas Gage, who became the military governor, he was allowed to just dissolve the current government and appoint a new one and tell them when and where he wanted them to meet. Really arbitrarily, the goal was to kind of exhaust them into compliance.
Right.
And the next two, they kind of go together. I'm going to read them together here. He has dissolved the representative houses repeatedly for opposing with many firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. Because, again, they were like preventing elections. They were standing in the way of the rule of law and the way that things had always gone. This was especially in places where he saw the colonists' actions in protests as rebellious. And so it was kind of pick and choose, like if they were being what he considered rebellious, they would have new laws passed that would really keep them from having access to their government and representation. And this was a big thing that's going to come up in Boston after the Tea Party. But the royal governors could actually force legislatures into recess to force them to comply. And the new dangers they were talking about was how the king decided that the colonial ships were no longer under the king's protection. So he was like taking away the things that the government provided for them as punishment.
So like taking away services and contracts that a lot of things have been built on understanding that this resource would in fact be there in case of need. I mean, it's not like these ships were floating around hoping to get attacked by pirates, knowing that the protection of the British flag flying from their mast really tended to discourage, folks from attacking their boats, especially like French boats. French and the English weren't friends at all. But like saying you can't fly that flag anymore. I will no longer protect your boat. And if you are attacked by someone else, well, that's really not my problem. Even though at the time that they even bought the boat, they were told, yeah, you'll be able to fly the English flag and you'll have all the protections of all our super scary military behind you in case someone wants to pick a fight. To remove that is not just deeply unfair, to remove access to resources that communities have come to thrive with and depend on in many cases.
And it didn't really get anyone to comply. It just made them madder, which is why it's written here in this document. Next up there, it says, he has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. He was refusing immigration.
Can we get any more on the nose?
Yeah, they wanted
whole
people
concept of like the place where you come to be yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they wanted people to immigrate.
We were a nation of immigrants.
Mm-hmm. And they wanted immigrants. They wanted people to immigrate for the good that it would bring to the colonies. In some colonies like North Carolina, they would even provide tax exemptions for a period of time to immigrants before they were able to become naturalized citizens. And having the ability to become a naturalized citizen was a big part of America. Many of our founding fathers were, in fact, naturalized citizens.
Immigrants to the country. Every single one of them were, with the exception of the native-born people, they were all immigrants to the country.
Mm-hmm. And that's that naturalized citizen, meaning that they were immigrants who gained their citizenship. But then
through a logical and reasonably accessible court of immigration, I'm betting at the time.
Yeah, they had a path to citizenship.
They had a path to citizenship that made sense.
Mm-hmm. But then in 1773, King G3 decided no, and he struck down all those tax exemptions and ordered the royal governors to veto all of the naturalization laws. And the colonists had a problem with this because it felt openly hostile to immigrants and to the public good.
Right.
It continues. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary power. And then he has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries.
Hey, Tori.
Yeah.
Tori. This bit right here directly it wasn't even an amendment. That's just constitutional division of power.
Yeah, because this was really about how the judiciary part of the government was no longer independent or operating under the rule of law, but under the king's thumb, who controlled whether they had a job or got paid.
Do you remember that episode where we talked about Cadbury Bunny and how he got super involved in the courts? And there was no reason for him to be involved in the courts. And and then do you remember how the Sugar Act actually took away their ability to go to their own judges, so they had to go to freaking Nova Scotia for a trial that definitely wasn't just going to be found in the favor of the crown, because it was definitely just a guy who worked for the king and was paid every time he made a judgment in favor of the crown.
That whole Admiralty Court thing is its own grievance. So yes, you're on.
Stop messing with the judges. People don't like it.
Well, and on top of this, the colonies had the right to elect or appoint judges revoked. And the colonists, they felt that the changes made to the court functions would make the judges want to make their decisions to please the king rather than make their decisions in adherence to the rule of law. So next up, he has erected a multitude of new offices and hithers swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. This grievance was in reference to the new officials who were sent in swarms, literally likening them to swarms of annoying insects to enforce all of the new laws. And this is This is including the American Board of Customs Commissioners and staff, along with the staff of the new Admiralty Court that took away their judiciary rights. And you might be shocked to hear this, but these new offices...
I will not be, I can promise you.
No, you won't be at all. These new offices, in combination with the public opinion of them, led to a lot of conflict.
Really? You don't say?
Yeah. The Stamp Act would have been a part of this one as well. Continuing on, we have, he has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent and superior to the civil power. And this complaint was specifically about military power being deployed on the streets during times of peace. The concern was that the British government would use this military power against its own people. Of course, the British justified this by saying they were providing protection against the foreign enemies like the French. But the colonists, they felt like these troops were being deployed to get the citizens in line and agree to the laws that they felt were unconstitutional while stepping all over their rights. And that
Are you listening? Are you listening?
They also feared that these troops being present in the cities during times of peace would lead to escalations, especially because the British regulars, the redcoats, were instructed to suppress protests and enforce laws by, well, force.
That's all I got. It's just animalistic grunting and flailing.
Appropriate. Continuing. He is combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. And the others referred to in this complaint would be King G3's administration in Parliament, because the colonies didn't believe that Parliament had a right to make laws for them. So this was a big problem. Now, the colonists put the administration's choices on the king's shoulders because it was the king who had allowed Parliament to overstep the established boundaries and continue to step on their rights, meaning that the king was going against established law and order and combining powers with those who agreed with his choice to do that.
Doge. Okay.
And then continuing for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, meaning that he had deployed large bodies of armed troops amongst them. This was a problem because the colonists were forced to pay for the troops responsible for their oppression, and they didn't want their tax dollars to go to funding the soldiers who were making their lives worse and terrorizing their cities. And when I say terrorizing, you can find accounts of the things that would happen where the military was. And on that exact note, the next grievance reads... for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. Meaning that he basically made the soldiers immune from accountability for their bad actions and murders as civilians, and they would pretend to investigate or try them in court for their actions. Like, I brought examples here, right? Like in 1768, there were 2 citizens in Maryland who were murdered by British Marines. And there was a lot of evidence proving that they did it, but they were acquitted. And then, just to one up that, right? They already weren't held accountable. But then in 1774, there was an act passed that stated if a British soldier committed murder while in the colonies, he would face trial back in Britain, not the place where it happened. And this is clearly a problem for so many reasons. But in addition, there's no evidence that a British soldier ever faced trial for their actions against American citizens after that law was passed.
Huh.
Yeah. Like if they stood in their way, they would.
And these are
trouble.
all the grievances that we sent to. Do we have more grievances, or are we done with the grievances?
We got a few more. We have a few more.
We got a few more. But these are all grievances that in 1776, the "In God We Trust" guys with the powdered wigs and the short pants sent to their tyrannical monarch, outlining why they didn't want to be a part of that anymore.
The powdered wigs and the short pants. But yeah, no, everything you said. So another grievance they had was for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, because their trade was isolated. There were all these new trade laws that really made it so they couldn't trade like they had before with other nations. And then they continued for imposing taxes on us without our consent. And I just think it's really interesting that the whole no taxation without representation bit, it wasn't even near the top of the list. So it's interesting to me that that's the part we learned in school that the whole thing was about. Continuing, it says, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. And that grievance, of course, dates all the way back to the Sugar Act and the Stamp Acts with the admiralty courts that removed their rights to trial by jury kind of arbitrarily because, you know, they couldn't even go through their normal process. They would just get sent to Halifax and then have to fight for their side.
Nothing.
Next up, we have for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. And that's in regards to a British policy that took their right to trial where the supposed crime took place away. And 1774, certain quote unquote crimes would require that the colonists be removed from the colonies and tried in Britain or elsewhere, which of course was like incredibly unfair because, again, that due process part is just like completely taken away. They're just like removed.
If you're not following by now, I can't help you. Go ahead.
Next, we have for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. So this grievance was in regards to Quebec, which was a North American colony that didn't join in the revolution because of the government that Britain had established there. And so the colonists saw that as an example of what Britain wanted to do to all of the colonies and have this absolute power. So it was kind of like Quebec was being used as this example. Like, once we can make this everything that we want and have this absolute control, we can then deploy that across all of the colonies.
Model city, I'm sure.
Yeah. We got a couple more. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government. Now, we've talked a bit about the differences in colonial charters and governments. So what this grievance was really in regards to the way that their charters could just be like revoked and changed depending on the crown opinion of the citizens' behavior in that colony.
Which, by the way, charters were complicated, but for the purpose of this discussion, basically the rules that decided what type of government they got to run.
Yes.
And all the things they were allowed to do as a colony. So like, you can't invade this territory that isn't yours, but you can build roads as you feel fit.
Yeah.
It was a charter. It was basically the outline formula of what made a colony, and all of them were a little different. And we discussed in a previous episode the types of charters we could have. You should go listen to that.
Yes. And with this specific grievance, they were really discussing how like their charters, the way that their government had run for so long could just be snatched away, right? And this grievance was specifically in regards to the fallout of the Boston Tea Party, where Massachusetts they had their charter revoked and they were basically put under martial law and the rights were stripped, which would kind of like be akin to a state losing its rights now because the president didn't like how they were operating. Like, that's basically what they were talking about in this grievance, is that the colonies would lose their rights because the king didn't like what they were doing.
Weird.
Yeah. And then for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever, meaning that the right of the colonies to self-govern was continuously being undermined by the crown, claiming the authority to make the laws in taxes in all cases whatsoever. And this one, again, is kind of similar to the idea of states' rights. The government can't just decide that it knows what's best for a state without the consent of those inhabitants. So that's what that's in reference to. And
the government can't just decide what's good for a state without the state's inhabitants' consent.
Mm-hmm. And then continuing, it says that he has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. And that is in reference to when the king withdrew crown protection on colonial ships. He also withdrew their expectation of safety and then, sent in soldiers. So they continue in that same vein. They say he has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burned our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people, which is in reference not just to the actions taken by the crown in regards to actual battles, like the Battle of Bunkers Hill that had taken place over a year before the Declaration of Independence was signed, but also they were like burning down towns and stuff.
Invading cities.
Yeah, that's actually the next thing here, the next grievance says that he is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. Because he was literally setting in military. That wasn't even like the official military, right? Like, he was sending in the German Hessians, and then he was paying these soldiers to fight the Americans who were supposed to be citizens. They were supposed to be Englishmen. Like, it was a continued escalation.
Mm-hmm. And these forces were being used against not just like people who weren't naturalized citizens, but like actual British citizens. They were British citizens right up until July 2nd. Yeah, July 2nd, 1776, when they passed the motion. July 4th, when they actually wrote down the broadside that was then sent to the king. All of this happened.
Yeah.
They were British citizens right up until that point.
Mm-hmm. We've got 2 grievances left here, okay? One being, he has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. It's meaning that he is forcing citizens who were captured to take up arms against their fellow citizens or face the consequences of execution themselves, which is really referencing the practice of press ganging, where people would be forced to serve in the Royal Navy, whether they wanted to or not. Many felt like it was a prison situation. And the last grievance here, before we get to how they ended this document, says, he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Now, this one... Now, this one really meant that King G3 had been the source of the rebellion. And now that it was happening, he was taking every opportunity he could to deploy any person he could find to cause chaos and destruction in the streets. And because of the nature of the conflict, causing a civil war and uprisings. And of course, there is that bit in there, that disgusting, incorrect stereotype about the native peoples and their style of warfare thrown in there for dramatic effect. Don't love that part, but it is part of the document, and I'm not going to omit it. But those are the grievances. But there is a bit after those grievances.
Okay.
After the list of grievances, the Declaration of Independence continues to say, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Where they continue in this, like the closing there, is they say that nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. Like, we've been trying to get everyone's attention. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them to the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations. That's a whole lot of big words to say that we have reminded everyone of how these colonies came to be. We have appealed to their sense of justice, to the laws that they know and abide by that don't seem to be getting honored the same way here, even though we are the same country, like we're brothers here. And we have told them that this would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. And they too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity, which is the relationship between those who share common ancestors. I did have to look that word up.
With blood. Consanguine. I should make a podcast just about my weird word knowledge. I'm not going to do that.
I would listen to it.
But I...
And they say, we must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. In the end there says, we, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states that are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all the political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. And then there's some like more stuff about how they could like do war on their own and like make their own choices, right? Like it's a whole lot of legal mumbo jumbo.
There was a lot of boilerplate that for the time had to be included because essentially they weren't just declaring independence from Britain to Britain. They were also telling France and Germany and Austria and Italy and Brazil that, hey, we're actually going to be a whole big kid country and we will defend ourselves from you if you view this as an opportunity to come try to like invade a tiny baby country.
Yes. And the last sentence in the Declaration of Independence says, quote, and for the support of this declaration, with firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So they are saying we will go down with this ship. There's no take backsies.
Which is not something to be undertaken lightly. Because again, this wasn't just, the big important guys that we continuously talk about, because the personalities of our founding fathers are really important in understanding how and why our country is the way that it is. But they knew it wasn't just those guys. It wasn't their lives at risk. The entire population of people, and keep in mind, there were loyalists still on the ground. The moment this came out, the country fractured even further because there were people who absolutely did not want this to happen. They were rebelling right up until the point that independence was declared. And that's a line too far. I want to be a British citizen. And if I have to give up what I have to give up, then so be it. I'll give it up, but I don't want to do it on our own. So the moment that happened, it fractured even more. And if this failed, everyone on the ground would probably be executed, or their lives would be made a lot worse instantly.
Yeah, the signers of the Declaration felt like they were signing their death warrants, because if they didn't win, that was it.
It was gone. And they also knew that the impact was further than just them and their family and their riches. Mm-hmm. It was going to impact the baker down on 2nd Street.
Yeah.
It was going to impact everybody. Boston, Philadelphia, Rhode Island, Quebec. Like, everything was going to change with this document. They waited a really long time. More than 10 years. Arguably a century of preparation. But from the point at which the first domino toppled, it's 11 years before they declared independence.
And the debates happening started long before that motion was even brought to the Congress. They were debating this for a long time. But yeah, that's the Declaration of Independence. If you haven't read it, now you could say you have, because audiobooks are reading, and I did just read to you.
You can You can take or leave Gwenna's dramatics about it.
I enjoy them. But I feel like it is worth knowing what the Declaration of Independence says beyond we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. But
honestly, I routinely use life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Am I encroaching upon anyone's life, liberty, or pursuit of happiness? Have fun.
Yeah, that's part of the American values is like, leave me alone. That was kind of a big vibe there. But don't worry. Next week, we will be getting back into Pennsylvania on Founded, an Airwave Media podcast. But thank you for listening to this episode of Founded. I hope you found something interesting. Drop an email at foundedhistory@gmail.com and let me know what you want to find out next. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, like, review, hit all the buttons, do all the things so more folks can find Founded. And remember, we don't see history repeat itself, but we continue to hear the echoes.
They're really freaking loud today.
Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like Childproof and a bunch of other podcasts that don't feature Gwenna and I, like the American Revolution podcast. We'll see you next time. Well, you'll see us.